Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today we're going to the summer of 1863 in Union occupied Nashville, Tennessee, where a young woman named Anna Rhodes is visiting the headquarters of General Walter C. Whitaker. She's there arranging to have a meeting with him, hoping for a meeting, and she's accompanied by a casket containing the remains of her husband, First Lieutenant Amos B. Rhodes of the 7th Pennsylvania Cavalry. He's pictured here. Whitaker, perhaps not surprisingly, granted her an interview. He was a Kentuckian known for his volatile temper and a fondness for alcohol. Despite that hard exterior, Whitaker encouraged the interview and listened and was moved as Anna recounted the grim errand that prompted her visit. Anna explained that her husband was a gallant officer killed in a recent fight, that she had traveled from her home to bring his remains back to Pennsylvania, but that the trip had cost more than had planned, and now she was out of money. She needed help and requested transportation some way to get herself and her husband back home to have that burial she wanted so badly. Anna, in fact, had seen little of her husband since their marriage just 2 years earlier. Back in the summer of 1861, she had wed Amos in the bustling town of Williamsport in Pennsylvania. She was then 18 years old, a school teacher. She eked out a living, taking care of a widowed mother and 5 siblings. Amos, 6 years her senior, worked in a local foundry as a molder of iron castings. The wedding took place on August 8th, 1861, just a week after Amos returned home from a 3-month stint in the 11th Pennsylvania Infantry. That was one of the 3 months regiments, those first responders after the bombardment of Fort Sumter. During its 3 months, the regiment did see some action, including a fight on July 2nd, 1861, a skirmish with Confederates in Virginia near Falling Waters. The rebels that they fought were under the command of a colonel named Thomas J. Jackson, who, as you students of the Civil War know, would soon receive the nom de guerre Stonewall for his steadfast defense at the Battle of Bull Run just a few weeks after that little skirmish at Falling Waters. After Amos returned home, after he got married, local Army recruiters in Williamsport came looking for volunteers for a new regiment, and Amos signed up. He joined a company that became part of the 7th Pennsylvania Cavalry. The rank and file of the company elected officers, a common practice in the volunteer regiments, and voted Amos first lieutenant. His previous military experience fighting rebels in Virginia with the 11th likely proved valuable. He had military experience and got him some votes, no doubt. The 7th went to Tennessee and soon crossed sabers with enemy horse soldiers commanded by some of the Confederacy's finest, including Nathan Bedford Forrest. On July 13th, 1862, Forrest's men surprised and captured the Union garrison at Murfreesboro, where Amos and some of his fellow Pennsylvanians were stationed. They all fell into enemy hands. Amos spent the rest of the year as a prisoner of war, 1862, in Georgia and Virginia, and in January 1863, he was exchanged and sent to the North. It was about this time that he posed here for this portrait in New York City in the studio of a famous photographer that you all know, Matthew Brady. He may have visited Anna before he returned to his comrades in the 7th, who were on duty back in Tennessee. 5 months later, 5 months after he returned, his luck ran out. On June 27th, 1863, Amos was part of a 225-man detachment from the 7th that participated with other Federal cavalrymen in an attack against enemy infantry and artillery at Shelbyville, about 50 miles south of Nashville. A Confederate cavalryman named John A. Wyeth described the engagement in his autobiography and an article in Harper's Weekly magazine. He said, or wrote, "I witnessed one of the most magnificent cavalry charges of the entire war." Wyeth continued, "Had we been wise, our small band would have scattered at once into the woods to the east and saved itself, instead of waiting to be ridden over." Wyeth watched as Amos and the other Union cavalry approached along a main road on the outskirts of town. Wyeth continued, "On either side of the highway, in columns of fours, they advanced at a steady gallop until they passed into the opening in a line of earthworks through which the main road led, some 200 or 300 yards in our advance. As soon as they reached this point inside the works, still on the full run, they deployed from columns of fours into line of battle like the opening of a huge fan. The movement was made with as much precision as if it had been done in an open plain, on dress parade, or in some exhibition of discipline and drill." Wyeth continued, he observed that the Federals came on rapidly with their sabers raised high. It was a glorious sight, and the thunder of their horses' hooves was the only sound. Not a word of command, not a huzzah from them, or a yell of defiance from us, do I recall. The truth is, there was no defiance from us, only the courage born of despair, for we knew we were doomed. Wyeth continued, "Our orders were to stand until they approached within 50 yards, when we were to empty our rifles, draw our pistols, and then sauve qui peut. In other words, fire a shot and run, every man for himself." The silent fan of Federals thundered down upon them. Wyeth and his comrades braced for action. Wyeth stated, "It was only a short space of time, probably the fraction of a minute, until they were so near that we could distinguish their faces and, in fact, their individual features." He continued, "Leveling our guns at them, we fired our final volley, and by the time our horses' heads were faced to the rear, they, coming at full speed, were upon us. Some of the Confederates fled into Shelbyville. Others, including Wyeth, took off into the countryside and went into hiding." Amos and the rest of the 7th paused at this juncture. They then received new orders to pursue the retreating enemy into town, where a large number of Confederate infantry and an artillery battery of 4 cannon had massed, waiting for them. The 7th charged straight through the center of Shelbyville, supported by other troops that attacked along side streets to the left and the right of the Pennsylvanians. Most of the Confederates surrendered or skedaddled, but a pocket of determined rebels continued the fight from a railway station and an adjacent brick structure. Amos and his company attacked the station from behind to force them out. During the skirmish that ensued, 6 Pennsylvanians were shot and killed, including Amos. According to the senior officer of the 7th, Lieutenant Colonel William B. Sipes, the dead were buried before the regiment left Shelbyville. So, pause here. This is the first burial place for Amos. In addition to those 6 killed, the 7th suffered 10 wounded during the entire engagement. Total losses for all Union forces involved amounted to 35. Confederate casualties estimated ran into the hundreds. That charge at Shelbyville turned out to be the culmination of the Middle Tennessee campaign, a week-long operation with low casualties overall, commanded by Union Major General William S. Rosecrans and his Army of the Cumberlands. Old Rosie, as his soldiers called him, skillfully maneuvered Confederate General Braxton Bragg and his army out of the region and threatened the safety of rebel-held Chattanooga. News of the victory in Tennessee quickly spread to the north, but it was overshadowed. Reports of glorious victories at the Battle of Gettysburg and the Siege of Vicksburg completely obliterated the achievement of Rosecrans and his army. In the midst of the wild celebrations that erupted across the Union in the wake of the twin victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg, Anna received word of the death of her husband, Amos. She was smart, savvy, and fiercely independent. She set out alone to the South to recover her husband's remains. She finally had that meeting with General Whitaker, and Whitaker, that stony guy, the volatile temper, the hard drinker, he was moved enough to write a request to his superior officer, General Robert S. Granger, an old West Pointer, an old crusty West Pointer in command of the military district that included Nashville. Whitaker had a simple request that Anna be furnished transportation for herself and for Amos's body to Louisville, Kentucky, from where she would likely continue her journey to Williamsport. Granger, surprisingly, perhaps shockingly, denied the request. He simply stated, "We have no authority for transporting the body of her husband." Period. End of statement. What happened next? Not entirely clear. According to federal burial records, Amos's remains were buried in Tennessee, most likely somewhere in the Nashville area, moved perhaps from Shelbyville, and then later removed again from Nashville to the Stones River National Cemetery, which was established in late 1865. You'll find on records his name, but the exact location of his grave is not exactly known. A Pennsylvania state record of veterans' burials dated 1939, decades after the end of the war, records Amos as being buried in another place, Section 66, grave number 49 of the Williamsport Cemetery. In fact, if you go there, you'll find his grave. It's a veteran's grave, one of those classic white headstones. Begs some questions. Did Anna come back later to disinter his body and bring him home? Or maybe the federal record is mistaken and Amos was never buried in the Stones River National Cemetery. Or perhaps the federal government was correct all along and the grave marker in Williamsburg is a mere cenotaph placed in the cemetery. The mystery is yet to be resolved. But we do know for certain what became of Anna. She went to Washington, D.C., and landed a job at the Treasury Department not long after she returned from Tennessee. At some point in Washington, she met a veteran, Henry Marcotte. He was a lieutenant who had been wounded at the Battle of Chancellorsville in 1863. The couple married in October 1865. Henry continued on in the regular army, and Anna accompanied him, becoming a classic army wife of the 19th century, to various frontier posts. They eventually settled in St. Augustine, Florida. Anna rose to local prominence there as editor and publisher of the Tatler of Florida Society, a popular newspaper published weekly during the winter tourist season. She was a crusader for civic responsibility, active in a number of organizations. And after Henry died in 1923, Anna moved to New York City and lived with her only child, a daughter from that second marriage with Henry. Anna lived until 1935, dying at age 93. We also know where she's buried. It's alongside Henry in Arlington National Cemetery. So thanks for listening. See you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.